Most people are praying for breakthroughs they're not prepared to walk into. You're asking God for increase, favor, opportunity, but when the door cracks open, you hesitate, you say you have faith, but faith that doesn't move is fantasy. Prayer is not a substitute for obedience. It's preparation for it. You don't pray for harvest and refuse to plant seed. You don't pray for strength and avoid the gym. And you don't pray for wealth while ignoring wisdom. Faith was never meant to make you passive. It was designed to make you bold. God doesn't respond to comfort. He responds to conviction. If you're serious about the promise, you must be serious about the process. Stop asking for what you're unwilling to act on, because the moment you move, heaven moves. Don't pray for it if you won't move for it. Faith is proven by movement, not by emotion, not by intention, not by how loud you say amen. Movement, because belief is invisible until it produces behavior. You can say you believe all day long, but what you do is the only thing that tells the truth. See, a lot of people confuse agreement with faith. They hear something powerful, they nod their head, they feel inspired, and they call that faith. That's not faith. That's inspiration. Faith shows up in your calendar. Faith shows up in your bank account. Faith shows up in your habits. If you say you believe God for increase, but you won't increase your skills, your discipline, or your capacity, then what you have is not faith, it's desire. And desire without movement is just a wish. If a farmer says he believes for harvest but never plants seed, we wouldn't call him faithful. We'd call him foolish. The proof that he believes in harvest is not in his words. It's in the fact that he puts seed in the ground when there is no evidence yet of a crop. That's movement. That's conviction. That's faith in action. Some of you are waiting for certainty before you move, but certainty is not the requirement. Conviction is. You don't move because you see the whole picture. You move because you trust the one who gave you the vision, and trust always produces steps. The reason movement is so powerful is because it separates the interested from the committed. A lot of people are interested in success. Few are committed to it. A lot of people are interested in wealth. Few are committed to becoming the kind of person who can manage it. Faith is the dividing line. Because when you truly believe something, you rearrange your life around it. If you believed your breakthrough was on the other side of one uncomfortable conversation, you'd have it. If you believed your future depended on learning a new skill, you'd already be studying. If you believed that generosity unlocked increase, you wouldn't hesitate to give. Your behavior always follows your belief. And here's the truth. Fear also produces movement, just in the opposite direction. When you believe something bad will happen, you act cautiously. When you believe something great is possible, you act courageously. So the question is not whether you have faith. The question is what you have faith in. Are you believing in the possibility of success, or are you believing in the probability of failure? Because whatever you believe, you will move toward. Faith doesn't eliminate risk. It redefines it. The biggest risk is not stepping out. The biggest risk is staying stuck. The biggest risk is praying for change and never positioning yourself for it. You cannot steer a parked car. Direction only comes when there is motion. Some people say, I'm waiting on God. But sometimes God is waiting on you to send the email, waiting on you to launch the idea, waiting on you to make the call, waiting on you to step into the room, because movement signals readiness. Movement says, I trust you enough to act. And when you move, something shifts internally before it ever shifts externally. Confidence grows. Clarity increases. Momentum builds. You don't get confidence before you act. You get confidence because you acted. The first step feels scary. The second step feels strategic. The third step feels natural. That's how faith works. It strengthens with repetition. You don't need massive action. You need consistent action. Small steps taken daily compound into extraordinary results. Faith is not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet discipline. Sometimes it's waking up early when nobody's watching. Sometimes it's investing when it would be easier to spend. Sometimes it's staying committed when quitting would feel comfortable. Movement is proof. And here's what happens when you move. Opportunities appear that were invisible before. Resources connect that weren't accessible before. People take you seriously because you took yourself seriously. The universe responds to decisiveness. Heaven responds to obedience, but nothing responds to hesitation. You say you believe, show me your steps, because faith is not a feeling you protect. It's a force you release. It demands expression. It demands embodiment. It demands motion. And when your actions align with your prayers, that's when acceleration happens. Don't pray for it if you won't move for it. Prayer prepares you for action. It doesn't replace action. It refines you for it. A lot of people treat prayer like an escape hatch. They pray so they don't have to move. They pray so they don't have to decide. They pray so they don't have to take responsibility. But that's not what prayer was designed for. Prayer was never meant to make you passive. It was meant to make you precise. When you pray correctly, something shifts. Not around you first, but within you. Your perspective sharpens. Your motives get checked. Your fear gets confronted. Prayer is alignment. It aligns your heart with purpose. It aligns your mind with clarity. It aligns your spirit with truth. And once alignment happens, movement becomes natural. See, when you're misaligned, action feels heavy. You procrastinate, you hesitate, you second guess. But when you're aligned, you move with conviction. You're not reckless, you're not impulsive, you're intentional. That's what prayer does. It prepares your internal world so your external steps are powerful. Prayer is like loading the arrow into the bow, but at some point you have to release it. Some people say they're waiting for a sign, but prayer is the sign. The peace you feel, that's preparation. The clarity you gained, that's preparation. The conviction that won't leave you alone, that's preparation. And once you're prepared, the next step is obedience. Obedience is the bridge between belief and manifestation. If you pray for wisdom and then ignore wise counsel, what was the point? If you pray for opportunity but won't step into uncomfortable rooms, what was the point? If you pray for increase but refuse to increase your discipline, what was the point? Prayer gives you insight. Action gives you results. And here's what most people miss. Prayer doesn't remove responsibility. It reveals it. When you truly spend time in prayer, you don't walk away thinking, God will do everything. You walk away thinking, now I know my part, because faith is partnership. It's divine cooperation. You do the natural. God does the supernatural, but the supernatural rarely shows up where the natural is neglected. You don't pray for a fit body and skip the workout. You don't pray for a successful business and avoid the sales call. You don't pray for restored relationships and refuse to communicate. Prayer strengthens you for the workout. It gives you courage for the call. It softens your heart for the conversation, but you still have to show up. Prayer changes your posture before it changes your position. When your posture changes, you stop begging and start believing. You stop doubting and start declaring. You stop shrinking and start stepping forward, because real prayer builds confidence, not arrogance, a confidence. The quiet certainty that you are supported, guided, and equipped, and confidence eliminates hesitation. Have you ever noticed that after deep prayer, you feel bold, you feel clear, you feel ready? That's not accidental. That's preparation. But if you sit on that readiness, it fades. Preparation without participation leads to frustration. You don't pray to avoid the storm. You pray to walk through it with authority. Sometimes prayer won't give you the full blueprint. It will just give you the next step, and that's enough. Because clarity expands with obedience. The more you move, the more you see. The more you trust, the more is revealed. Prayer starts the process. Action continues it. The mistake people make is separating the two. They pray in one season and act in another. But power happens when they overlap. When your prayer life fuels your execution. When your quiet time strengthens your bold time. When your faith conversations with God translate into fearless conversations with people. Prayer is where fear gets dismantled. It's where insecurity gets exposed. It's where excuses lose their power. You come in anxious and you leave anchored. You come in confused and you leave directed. But direction demands movement. You can't claim you're waiting on God if you haven't obeyed what He already showed you. If He told you to start, start. If He told you to forgive, forgive. If He told you to invest, invest. If He told you to speak, speak. Delayed obedience is disguised disbelief, and disbelief cancels momentum. Prayer prepares you internally so you can perform externally. And when preparation meets obedience, momentum begins. Doors open, opportunities align, favor flows. Not because you prayed alone, but because you prayed and moved. Don't pray for it if you won't move for it. God multiplies what you release, not what you hold. Not what you protect, not what you hide, what you release. And this is where most people miss it, because releasing feels risky. It feels uncomfortable. It feels like loss before it feels like increase. But multiplication is always on the other side of surrender. A seed only multiplies after it leaves your hand. As long as the seed stays in your pocket, it has potential, but it has no productivity. It's safe, but it's stagnant. The moment you release it into the soil, it looks like you lost it. You can't see it anymore. It's buried. But what looks like loss is actually the beginning of multiplication. And that's how faith works. If you want greater income, you may have to release comfort. If you want greater influence, you may have to release insecurity. If you want greater impact, you may have to release control. Whatever you're praying to increase, check what you're willing to release, because heaven doesn't multiply what you cling to. It multiplies what you trust it with. Some people say they want abundance, but they hold on to every dollar with fear. Some say they want opportunity, but they hold on to old habits that sabotage growth. Some say they want next level relationships, but they hold on to pride. You cannot receive with closed hands. Closed hands are designed for gripping, not gaining. Open hands receive. Open hands release. Think about this. When you give value, value returns. When you invest time into growth, growth returns. When you sow encouragement, encouragement returns. Life responds to release. The law of multiplication is built into creation itself, but it requires participation. And here's the part most people don't like. You don't get to choose the harvest without first choosing the seed. If you sow hesitation, you reap missed opportunities. If you sow courage, you reap confidence. If you sow discipline, you reap freedom. Every action is a seed. Every decision is a seed. Every sacrifice is a seed. And seeds don't negotiate. They reproduce after their kind. So if your harvest isn't what you want, examine what you've been releasing. Releasing doesn't just mean money. It means effort. It means energy. It means excellence. When you release excellence into your work multiplies. When you release generosity into your relationships deepen. When you release focus into your craft, your skill expands. You cannot multiply what you refuse to deploy. Some of you are waiting for multiplication before release, but that's backwards. Multiplication follows release. The 5 loaves don't multiply while they're being hoarded. They multiply when they're handed over. The oil doesn't increase while it's sitting untouched. It increases while it's being poured. Increase happens in motion. And yes, release feels vulnerable because you're stepping away from certainty. You're letting go of what you can control. But control is often the enemy of growth. You say you trust God, but trust is proven in what you're willing to let go of. You don't lose what you release in faith. You transform it. Time released into learning becomes skill. Money released into assets becomes wealth. Energy released into service becomes influence. The release is temporary. The multiplication is lasting. And here's something powerful. When you release at a higher level, you multiply at a higher level. Average release produces average results. Extraordinary release produces extraordinary outcomes. That doesn't mean reckless decisions. It means bold obedience, strategic generosity, intentional sacrifice. Because whatever leaves your hand doesn't leave your life when it's released with purpose. The reason some people stay stuck is not because they lack opportunity. It's because they lack release. They're waiting for perfect conditions. They're waiting for guarantees. But seeds don't wait for perfect weather. They're planted in faith. And once planted, something begins to happen beneath the surface. Roots grow before fruit appears. Progress happens before applause comes. Multiplication starts invisibly. That's why patience matters. That's why trust matters. Because what you release today may not show up tomorrow, but it will show up. If you keep releasing value, you cannot avoid increase. If you keep releasing faith, you cannot avoid growth. If you keep releasing obedience, you cannot avoid favor. The question is not whether multiplication works. The question is whether you're willing to participate in it. Because God multiplies what you release, not what you hold. Don't pray for it if you won't move for it. Clarity comes after commitment, not before it. And that's where most people get stuck. They're waiting to see the entire staircase before they take the first step. They want the full blueprint, the complete strategy, the guaranteed outcome, but that's not how faith works. Faith gives you the next step, not the whole map. You don't get clarity by standing still. You get clarity by moving forward. Think about driving at night. Your headlights don't show you the entire highway. They show you a few hundred feet ahead. But as long as you keep driving, the road keeps revealing itself. If you refuse to move until you can see the entire journey, you'll never leave your driveway. Commitment activates revelation. When you commit, something shifts. Your mind starts looking for solutions instead of excuses. Your creativity turns on. Your focus sharpens. Resources that were invisible suddenly become noticeable. Why? Because commitment changes what you pay attention to. Indecision keeps you foggy. Decision clears the air. A lot of people say they're confused, but what they really are is uncommitted. When you haven't decided, every option feels equally possible and equally risky. But the moment you decide, you eliminate distractions. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop entertaining backup plans that weaken your primary plan. Commitment burns the boats. And when there's no easy way back, you figure out a way forward. Some people want confidence before commitment, but confidence is a byproduct, not a prerequisite. You don't wait to feel ready. You commit and readiness grows. You don't wait to feel qualified. You commit and competence develops. You don't wait for fear to disappear. You commit and courage rises. Movement creates momentum. Momentum creates clarity. Have you ever noticed that the first step feels the hardest? That's because you're breaking inertia. But once you're in motion, the second step feels lighter. The third step feels strategic. The fourth step feels natural. That's clarity unfolding in real time. And here's the truth. You don't need clarity for the whole year. You need clarity for today. What is the next right move? Not the next 10, just the next one. Faith simplifies the process. It says, take the step you can see. Overthinking is often disguised fear. You tell yourself you're analyzing, but really you're avoiding. You say you're waiting for the perfect time, but perfect timing rarely announces itself. Clarity is not something you wait for. It's something you earn through obedience. When you commit to growth, you start seeing growth opportunities everywhere. When you commit to excellence, average becomes uncomfortable. When you commit to faith, hesitation loses its grip. Because commitment rearranges your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying. You start seeing yourself as someone building. You stop seeing obstacles as stop signs. You start seeing them as training grounds. Commitment doesn't remove uncertainty. It gives you the strength to move through it. And as you move, patterns appear. Lessons connect. Experience compounds. What once felt confusing now feels obvious, but it only feels obvious because you walked through it. Clarity is hindsight in motion. And many people quit in the fog. They turn around before the road clears, but if they had taken 3 more steps, the path would have opened. If they had made one more call, sent one more proposal, practiced one more hour, they would have seen what they were praying for. Commitment stretches you, and stretching produces capacity, and capacity attracts opportunity. You say you want bigger opportunities, but bigger opportunities require bigger capacity. And capacity doesn't grow through comfort. It grows through commitment. When you commit, you're telling yourself, I am becoming the kind of person who can handle what I'm asking for. That identity shift is powerful because once you decide who you are, your actions align, your habits align, your environment begins to align, and suddenly the fog that once surrounded you starts to lift. Not because the path was never there, but because you finally stepped onto it. Stop waiting for perfect clarity. Commit to the next step. The rest will reveal itself as you move. Don't pray for it if you won't move for it. Miracles follow motion. They don't follow intention. They don't follow emotion. They follow motion. And this is where everything we've talked about comes together. Because once you understand that faith requires movement, that prayer prepares you for action, that God multiplies what you release, and that clarity comes after commitment, you start to realize something powerful. Nothing happens until you move. Too many people are waiting for a miracle while standing still, but throughout life, the pattern is clear. When there was a barrier, someone had to step forward. When there was a need, someone had to offer what they had. When there was an opportunity, someone had to take the risk. The miracle didn't show up before the movement. It showed up because of it. Motion is the trigger. You don't see provision until you step into purpose. You don't experience strength until you attempt something that requires it. You don't see doors open until you walk toward them. Miracles are not random acts of magic. They are divine responses to bold obedience. And here's what stops most people. They want guarantees. They want certainty that if they move, it will work. But faith doesn't operate on guarantees. It operates on trust. And trust is demonstrated through steps. When you move, even imperfectly, you create momentum. And momentum attracts opportunity. Think about it. It's easier to steer a moving vehicle than a parked one. When you're in motion, adjustments can be made, corrections can happen. But if you refuse to move until everything feels perfect, you'll stay stuck in potential. Potential has never changed anyone's life. Action has. Some people are waiting for confidence to move, but confidence comes from movement. The first sales call builds more belief than 100 hours of overthinking. The first video posted builds more clarity than months of planning. The first investment teaches more than endless research. Miracles meet you in the arena, not on the sidelines. And movement doesn't have to be massive. It just has to be real. One step, one decision, one act of obedience. That's all it takes to shift your trajectory. Small hinges swing big doors. Small steps build unstoppable momentum. The problem is motion feels risky because motion exposes you. When you move, you can fail. When you move, people can judge. When you move, you might have to confront your limitations, but staying still has a greater cost. Staying still guarantees stagnation. Movement at least gives you a chance at transformation. And here's the truth. Miracles rarely look like miracles at first. They look like opportunities. They look like ideas. They look like uncomfortable invitations. They look like problems that require courage. But once you step into them, you realize they were answers all along. Motion reveals provision. When you step forward, the right people appear. When you act, resources align. When you commit, creativity flows. It's almost as if the universe conspires with courage, not because you deserve it more than anyone else, but because you positioned yourself for it. You cannot experience acceleration without first initiating movement. Think about momentum in physics. An object at rest stays at rest unless acted upon by force. That force is your decision. That force is your obedience. That force is your willingness to move when it would be easier to stay comfortable. Once you apply force, momentum builds. And once momentum builds, results compound. What felt impossible at the beginning becomes inevitable over time, but it all starts with motion. Some of you are closer than you think. You've prayed, you've prepared, you've released, you've committed. Now it's time to move. Not recklessly, but boldly. Not arrogantly, but confidently. Not fearlessly, but faithfully. Because courage is not the absence of fear. It's movement in spite of it. When you move, you send a signal. You declare, I trust what I believe more than I fear what I see. And that declaration changes everything. It changes how you show up. It changes how people respond to you. It changes what becomes possible. Miracles are not reserved for the lucky. They are activated by the obedient. So take the step, make the call, launch the vision, start the project, have the conversation, sow the seed, do the thing you've been postponing. Because heaven responds to motion. Don't pray for it if you won't move for it.